branch and landed on another, my eager self.
Oh hi, it's the
There,
next
the
guy.
soft light reached down from the clouds and cast a shine upon its tiny eyes. There was a sharpness unlike any animal, staring calmly in my direction, unblinking and beckoning me to come. So I did. Stepping across the creek fork, from smooth river stone onto earth and moss, I got within its reach, transfixed. Once again, the raven retreated further along the creek, deeper into the forest,
Kaboom.
from one branch to another, not making a sound as its feathers carried it into the darkening trees. It retreated and I pursued. I was again, just within arm's reach of the bird when I realized I couldn't see it anymore. It had vanished into a pocket of darkness between the pine needles. I broke away my gaze and looked around to find I couldn't see much of anything at all. All the trees around me were in the same darkness the raven had fallen back into, barely visible in a lingering blue, as dim as the first signs of dawn. The sun must have been far below the horizon, even its echoes at death's door. I turned back to look for the raven and peered into the darkness. I peered into the blackness it had disappeared into. I first saw nothing. With every second passing, blind eddies in my vision stirred and stirred to adapt to the dark yet never came together. I only felt hints of movement at the edges, sudden and silent. Then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, I started to feel a presence standing in front of my eyes that I couldn't see, cloaked in a darkness eyes would never adjust to. It must have been inches from my face, staring through me as my eyes darted around in the darkness, dilated to be as black as the night, frantic and blind. Then I felt it breathing. It was like a frigid wind, blowing in from the shadows and carrying fear, wrapping all around me like a python. Its breathing gave way to silent mutterings, whispers in the wind, coming from all around me, 1 second nearly inaudible, the next, inches from an ear, mumbling in a manic tone. In the fundamental variety of freshly made meals and selection of mixes available for purchase. An ear, mumbling in a manic tongue. I could feel its embrace tighten, like a vice around my waist, fear itself starting to strangle me. I felt a piercing sensation, digging its way into my stomach, cold and burning at the same time. I felt a hollowing deep inside, a numbness that spread and spread. It was like anesthesia. It was sweet and it was calming. It was cold and dark, not like winter but like sleep, soft, so soft. It was calling on me to sleep, to simply lay down for a while it took away the fear. I only had to sleep and let the shadows take me. I was held there, my eyelids getting heavier and heavier when I heard the song of a nightingale. It was the softest thing, perched on a thin branch to my right, its head bobbing up and down with its music, shining under a ray of moonlight that poked through the canopy. It turned to look back at me with a quizzical look, had tilted to the side with what looked like wonder on its tiny face, seeming to be asking me a question. Beep, beep, boop? It took to air with a bounce, rising through the moonlight, a strafe to the left and then to the right, chirping with the rhythm of its beating wings. Between the sway of the branches, I saw the full moon through the shade of its feathers, a silver light carrying a melody, one moment of seemingly all the beauty of the world. The bird drifted off into the skies, as soft as the wind. The darkness was gone when I looked back down, the forest pierced by pale rays that shone upon the creek's surface. I followed them back to the campsite, and to the sound of a crackling fire. I came and sat on a log across the fire pit from my father, facing the treeling. His face was painted by the dancing colors of the firelight, eyes staring deep into the blaze, like in a trance. I looked over his shoulder and into the forest. That same ancient evil was lingering, looking over our campsite. It seemed to pull at something inside my stomach. It ached dully as a string seemed to pull at something deep within me, something that wanted to join it. Yet the shadows were kept hidden in the forest, reduced to but a feeling of dread. The moonlight had watched over us that night. I felt an echo of that same dread raise the hairs on the back of my neck, forcing me to turn and take a look behind me. So, I imagine you won't be surprised that, in such a state, I proceeded to promptly crash my bike into the edge of the sidewalk and go flying into a garden. After a few rolls and a few too many scratches, I sat upright to get a look about my surroundings and find myself on the driveway of Rob's house. My first instinct was to be embarrassed. Yet I was promptly reminded of the kind of day this was when that embarrassment was greeted only by the sound of the rain, not one concerned neighbor even peeking out of a window. I suppose the crash had at least gotten my mind off things. My bike was resting peacefully at the Browns' door, the collapsed front tire continuing to slowly spin as if in a cartoon. I was walking up to it that I noticed that the front door had been left open. This was a small enough town that people often still left their doors unlocked. However, leaving them open entirely didn't adhere to any code of neighborly friendliness that I knew of. Letting go of the bicycle, I walked to the door with careful steps to knock. Once, and then twice, and then a few more times some moments later. I called out to Rob, to his dad, and then to his mom, and then knocked some more. No disgruntled neighbors seemed to care enough to look. No disgruntled neighbor seemed to care enough to open the door either when I toured a few houses to ask about the Browns. Only thing I saw was one black Jin, and it scurried off and vanished behind the house. A familiar coldness rose in my stomach for a moment before going away. I forced myself to ignore the feeling. After some time walking around the street, I came up and sat on the steps leading to the Browns' house and called Rob again. I dialed, started waiting, and was just about to punch something in exasperation when I heard his phone ringing inside the house. I figured that enough was enough and that I wasn't living in Silent Hill. I opened the door and went inside. I kept calling out for someone to answer me, yet my only company remained the hum of the raindrops. I looked into their backyard that gave into the forest surrounding our little town. The pines were damp and let none of what little light there was filtered down to the undergrowth, blending into one another, forming a silent void. A spring had worked its way into my steps by this point as I made my way through to Rob's room, looking over my shoulder as I turned my back to the woods, a knot tightening in my stomach at the thought of things much worse than just being caught trespassing. His phone was on his desk, next to his computer that was still running, a neon screensaver on his monitor lighting up the room as its fan hummed with the soft sound of the wind blowing against the house. Everything in its place but Rob. I was leaned back against his window overlooking his backyard, stretching and letting out a loud fuck as my stomach dropped. I felt the forest staring into me. Slowly turning back around, I looked outside the window. There were darkening clouds over the mountains now. The mist was its harbinger, telling tales of a storm to come. From there on, the pines stretched from the horizon all the way up to the tree line at the edge of the backyard. I forced myself to look down and saw a movement in the canopy, something below the leaves, tall, nearly poking above at times, that rustled the leaves some 50 yards off. I don't know what came over me, but I went down the stairs and onto the backyard to get a look. The entire day, I hadn't seen a single soul, not heard a word but my own echo in the empty streets. It had all seemed surreal, like followed by something I could never see. I just wanted to find something that broke the mold, that would do away with the dread in the air. However, I didn't. The feeling only got much worse as I stepped out the back door and onto the wet grass. The sound of the light rain grew deafening as each tap on my raincoat started to sound like a bang inside my skull, each gust of wind becoming footsteps racing behind me. The tops of the trees had stopped rustling. They grew more and more still as I approached the tree line, growing taller, turning into tall columns between which only darkness peered through. I was maybe just 1 yard away from the forest that all sound seemed to go away, lost into the darkness that now filled my vision. All I heard then was a soft panting somewhere in front of me. I walked closer and closer to the sound, the panting getting louder, faster, more excited, the trees around me absorbing all other sound, closing in, it felt like. All was darkness.